African history is often seen as little more than a footnote in the march of human civilization, an appendage to the supposedly richer tapestries of European and Middle Eastern antiquity. This assessment could not be more wrong. In modern-day Sudan, there are the ruins of once magnificent cathedrals hewn from mud brick, standing amidst the desert sands, remnants of a mighty civilization in the heart of Eastern Africa, which for centuries stood as an enclave of Christendom amidst a sea of Islamic powers. Welcome to our first video on the civilizations of Africa, where we will cover the forgotten kingdoms of Nubia. If you want to learn about the history of Africa, the sponsor of today's video, Blinkist, has you covered. Work towards being your best self in 2021, improve your knowledge, and learn about the world around you with Blinkist. This platform has been incredible for our personal growth and leisure in 2020, as it allowed us to learn and improve on the go and quickly. Blinkist takes the best insights from more than 3,000 non-fiction books and condenses them into 15-minute reads or ready-to-listen audios. The Rift by Alex Perry describes the recent developments on the continent, while China's Second Continent by Howard French describes Chinese efforts to influence Africa. The best thing? You can get offline access to all titles. Recently, Blinkist added full-length audiobooks. Premium subscribers get up to 65% off the regular retail price. Now they've teamed up with popular podcasters to get you to the heart of a podcast episode fast. Learn with us in 2021 by clicking the link in the description. The first 100 people to go to blinkist.com/kingsandgenerals are going to get unlimited access for 1 week to try it out. You'll also get 25% off if you want the full membership. Our story begins on the banks of the Nile River, whose rich silt deposits nurtured the ancient lands of the pyramids and pharaohs. However, the Nile does not stop flowing where ancient Egypt ended, instead snaking south into the heart of Africa, allowing many other civilizations to thrive upon its shores. The most prominent of these were the Nubians, a people who flourished in what is now Sudan. Around 2500 BC, the first powerful state in Nubia, Kerma, rose to prominence. Running roughly parallel to the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, the Nubian people of Kerma were sophisticated agriculturalists, cattle herders, ceramicists, and metal workers. They left behind huge ritualistic tombs known as defufes. Around 1550 BC, the armies of the Egyptian New Kingdom thundered southwards in their war chariots and brought Kerma under their rule. Egypt ruled over Nubia for roughly 500 years, during which time the Nubian peoples adopted many aspects of Egyptian culture, including the worship of Egyptian gods like Amun and Isis. Despite being under their occupation, the Nubians maintained much internal autonomy and a distinct identity. Egyptian art at the time depicted Nubian nobility with darker skin than their own, bedazzled in large earrings, and draped in robes made of exotic animal skins, making them very distinct from the average Egyptian. In the immediate aftermath of the apocalyptic Bronze Age collapse, which devastated all civilization on the eastern Mediterranean, the Nubians were able to reassert their independence, establishing the Kingdom of Kush, with its capital at the Amunic cult center of Napata. In the centuries that followed, the Nubians were able to reverse the tides against their former conquerors. It would be around 745 BC that the mighty Kushite king Piye would take advantage of unrest in the north to launch an invasion, occupying Egypt and becoming the first pharaoh of its 25th dynasty. Egypt flourished under Nubian rule, as the Kushite pharaohs oversaw a renaissance in Egyptian art and religion. This included the first widespread construction of pyramids in nearly 2,000 years, both in Egypt proper and in their homeland of Nubia. The good times were not to last, however, as in 674 BC, the warlike Assyrians marched down from the Fertile Crescent and after a 90-year struggle, permanently pushed the Kushites out of Egypt and back into Nubia. Kushite civilization continued on after this, with its capital moved to the ancient city of Meroe. Even in their reduced state, the realm remained an economic powerhouse, most prominently as a hub of trade, for they sat at the strategic crossroads between sub-Saharan Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Mediterranean world, Nubian traders peddled luxury goods such as gold, ivory and ebony, as well as a host of exotic African animals such as wildcats, monkeys, elephants and giraffes. One can't help but imagine a cheering throng of plebeians in the Circus Maximus of Rome, and wonder if they owed the grim spectacle of the ravenous lions in the sand below to the skilled trappers of Nubia. For centuries longer, the Kingdom of Kush coexisted with a string of foreign dynasties that ruled over their Egyptian neighbours, Persian Achaemenids, Ptolemaic Greeks, and the Roman Empire. A brief war was fought with Rome in the 1st century BC, but the Kushites, led by Queen Amanirenas, managed to assert their sovereignty against the legions, establishing the city of Aswan as the border between them and the imperial eagle. However, as Rome grew, it was able to monopolize Mediterranean trade, greatly reducing the Nubians' influence in that trading node. Furthermore, the nascent kingdom of Aksum had begun to expand to the southeast at the expense of Kushite territory, pushing the Nubians out of the lucrative Red Sea trade. With Kush in terminal decline, the Aksumites would launch a full-scale invasion in around 350 AD, resulting in the final collapse of the ancient kingdom. The Nubian peoples would weather this calamity and consolidate into 3 smaller successor states in Kush's former territory: Nubatia, Makuria, and Alodia. For a time, the fragmented Nubian states would continue to cling on to the bygone days of Kushite glory. Throughout the 5th century, the kings of Nubatia continued to adorn themselves in the royal regalia of their Meroite ancestors and worship their Egyptianized pantheon. However, a new religion would penetrate into the ancient Nubian desert and forever change the cultural fabric of the land. It is here that the Christian faith is finally introduced to Nubia. By the 4th century AD, Christianity had become the cultural backbone of the Roman Empire. In time, there emerged 5 main ecclesiastical centers of Christianity within its borders: Rome, Constantinople, Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria. Egypt became Christian through the Alexandrian Church. By the early 6th century, the western half of the empire had fallen, but the Greek-speaking Byzantine half endured and retained control of the wealthy region, becoming the greatest political and cultural powerhouse in the Mediterranean. Nubia had always been malleable to adopting the religions that came out of Egypt. Now, in order to strengthen their economic ties to the powerhouse that was Justinian's Roman Empire, they considered doing so again. The Romans in Alexandria sent their priests southwards. The Christianization of the Nubians was complete by 580, and the Kushite temples were converted into churches. The most striking evidence of social change during this era can be observed in the shift in burial rites. Whereas before, Kushite rulers were buried in ornate royal tombs amidst piles of wealth, no such glamour has been found for the monarchs of the Christian era. The deity above now meant more than any worldly king. For roughly a century, the kingdoms of Christian Nubia enjoyed a period of prosperity. Wealth from eastern Rome flowed down the Nile into their lands, and with it, cultural influence. Greek emerged as the dominant language among the Nubian aristocracy and clergy. It was around this time that the kingdom of Makuria absorbed Nubatia, becoming the predominant power in the region. However, across the Red Sea, a new faith was about to be born, and with it, a new era. By the time of Muhammad's death in 632, the young faith of Islam had spread firmly across the entirety of Arabia. Immediately afterwards, the Rashidun Caliphate stormed out of its homeland as some of the most efficient conquerors in world history. By 641, the armies of the Caliph Umar had seized Egypt. All of a sudden, the kingdoms of Nubia found themselves isolated from the rest of Christianity. Knowing the Nubians to be a dangerous power to leave unchecked, the Rashiduns immediately attacked the ancient land of Kush. In 642, the Arab general Uqba ibn Nafi led a column of 20,000 horsemen into Makuria. Initially uncontested, they proceeded towards the capital city of Dongola. the Muslims had vanquished the mighty Sassanid Persians and even brought the Romans to heel. So what was there to fear from Balad as-Sudan, the land of the black-skinned people? And yet, as they approached the Makurian capital, their foe finally emerged like a desert mirage, arrow points gleaming beneath the scorching sun. At the first Battle of Dongola, the deadly aim of 10,000 Nubian marksmen was able to inflict between 10,000 and 15,000 deaths on the unsuspecting Arabic horsemen. Ibn Nafi's army was eviscerated, and the Arabs were forced to retreat. They returned in 652 with a new army and siege weapons in tow, but were once more defeated in a pitched battle outside the mud brick walls of Dongola. After this setback, the Muslim rulers of Egypt and the king of Makuria came together and brokered a peace treaty known as the Pact. This pact was stipulated on an annual exchange of goods. The Makurians would export 360 slaves to Egypt per year, while the Egyptians would provide wheat, textiles, and other essential goods to the Makurians. Additionally, both parties would allow safe passage for each other's citizens in the other's lands, and the Makurians would maintain a mosque in their kingdom for the use of Muslim visitors. The Pact Treaty was a remarkable milestone. Firstly, it confirmed that the Nubians were the only ones who had successfully fended off the early Arabic invasions. Secondly, although no one knew it at the time, the Pact would turn out to be one of the longest-lasting diplomatic treaties in human history. It is during the long era of Pact that we have the most archaeological and literary records of medieval Nubian culture. So let us take a brief pause from the march of history to paint a picture of what Nubian society looked like during this time. Christianity was integral to every level of Nubian society. The king of Makuria traditionally also held the role of priest and was capable of performing mass. 6 major cathedral sites have been uncovered by modern archaeologists, the best preserved being located at Faris and Casa Ibrim. Additionally, hundreds of smaller churches have been found across the land. Although Egypt was ruled by Muslims, there remained a thriving protected class of Christians known as the Copts. These people were the descendants of the ancient Egyptians and practiced a vibrant brand of Orthodox Christianity. From the 8th to 14th centuries, the church in Nubia took its cues from the Coptic church. The two worked hand in hand, and most bishops in Nubia were ethnic Copts appointed from Egypt. However, unlike the Copts, who used their native Egyptian tongue to perform church services, the Nubians continued to use Greek as their liturgical language, remarkably so, as at that point they had been severed from regular contact with Eastern Rome for centuries. In later centuries, the indigenous Nubian language was incorporated into religious texts as well, written using a modified version of the Greek alphabet. For the average medieval Nubian, daily life was not unlike that of their Kushite ancestors. Society was overwhelmingly rural, composed of many little hamlets dotted along the fertile banks of the Nile, which farmed sorghum, millet, wheat, and barley as they had for millennia. The only striking difference from their pagan ancestors was how they expressed their faith. In every village, the church was the center of community life. Additionally, medieval Nubian peasants decorated the insides of their houses with protective biblical inscriptions. Many wore irigabs, locket-like leather amulets, within which a piece of scripture had been carefully sewn up inside. Medieval Nubia was a fairly egalitarian society. Women could own and transfer property independently and enjoyed great political power, as the royal succession of Nubian kings was matrilineal, so queen mothers were revered. Literacy was also encouraged amongst both sexes, and women sometimes served dignified positions as court scribes. On top of being sophisticated literati, Nubians were excellent craftsmen, producing many skilled textile weavers, carpenters, and potters. Indeed, southern ceramics were widely considered to be of better quality than their Egyptian counterparts, and were a common export in trade. The Nubians were fine artists as well. This was most prominently displayed in the interior of their churches, which were lovingly painted with ornate murals depicting winged angels, biblical prophets, and prominent Nubian kings and queens in luxurious robes. For centuries, the Christian kingdoms of Nubia enjoyed an era of prosperity, predicated on their unprecedentedly long and stable peace with the Islamic world. In 833, King Zacharias III of Mercuria even managed to send his son Gorgias to Baghdad, where he successfully bartered down the annual Nubian slave tribute to a third of its original amount. However, as remarkably long as it endured, the peace of the Ba'ath era would not last forever. Between the 7th and 12th centuries, power in Egypt had passed between various different Muslim dynasties, and each one had continued the tradition of peace with Nubia. This, however, would change with the ascension of the slave soldiers turned sultans of the Mamluk dynasty. Over time, the practice of sending slaves northwards, as stipulated in the Ba'ath, had long since ceased in favor of the exchange of other goods. When the Mamluk Sultanate came to power in Cairo in 1250, they aggressively demanded the slave tribute not only be reinstituted, but an amount of slaves equal to the number of annual payments missed were to be immediately sent northwards. This was unacceptable to the Mercurians, and before long, armed conflict had escalated. This officially ended the Ba'ath, which endured for 600 years. One potential reason for the Mamluk aggression on Nubia could be because the Crusades were in full swing at the time, and as European knights penetrated into the Islamic world, they became increasingly aware of their long-lost co-religionists in the desert. The Mamluks' warlike policy was therefore a likely effort to subjugate them before they could form an alliance with their fellow Christians and attack Islamic Egypt from two fronts. Mercuria saw some initial successes in the war that followed. In 1265, they survived a large-scale Mamluk raid, and in 1272 they struck back. Led by their king David, the Nubians destroyed the port town of Aidab, a crucial stop on a pilgrimage route to Mecca. 3 years later they scored another victory, razing the city of Aswan, which for centuries had been a peaceful trading hub between Christians and Muslims. Thoroughly incensed, the Mamluks levied an army in Cairo in 1276 and marched south, winning 3 decisive victories against the Mercurians, sacking Dongola, then capturing and executing King David. After that, Mercuria fell into a steep decline. As power dynamics in the region shifted drastically, the royal family fell victim to infighting, with various factions looking to win over Mamluk benefactors to gain the throne, putting the independence of the kingdom at risk. In 1317, the Mamluks were able to install a Muslim ruler, Saif al-Din Abdullah, onto the Mercurian throne, and the great throne hall of Dongola was converted into a mosque. While the general population did not convert to Islam, it was still a heavy blow to Christian Nubia. In the following decades, the situation would continue to spiral as the bubonic plague devastated communities across the Upper Nile, and warlike Bedouin tribesmen crossed the Red Sea, inflicting devastation upon Nubian lands. In 1365, a brutal civil war resulted in Dongola being destroyed, abandoned, and overrun by foreign tribes, thus reducing the once mighty kingdom of Mercuria to an irrelevant rump state, controlling a roughly 100-kilometer strip of the Nile River around the town of Addo. The southern Nubian kingdom of Alodia was not faring any better. Its capital Soba was sacked and destroyed during this time, either by the Bedouins or by the Funj Sultanate, which had taken advantage of the decline to expand into the region. Nubian society utterly collapsed in this era. What remained of their government descended into anarchy, the Nubian church ceased to exist as an organized entity, while Nubian literature and art completely disappeared from the historical record. Some semblance of an independent African Christianity would linger on in the Upper Nile until the early 16th century, before finally being snuffed out through a process of Islamification and Arabization. When the Ottoman Empire expanded into Nubia in the 1560s, they found no traces of an organized Christian society remaining in the region, marking the end of an era that had lasted for over a millennium. Despite the collapse of their kingdoms, the Nubians themselves have persevered into the modern day. Although now predominantly practicing Sunni Islam, they have managed to keep their traditional languages and many aspects of their indigenous culture alive. As the Nubian people look back on over 4,000 years of a proud, rich history, we too should all remember that in the heart of the African continent exists a legacy of rich and mighty kingdoms, and when it comes to the lesser-known regions of world history, there is always more than meets the eye. More videos on the African kingdoms are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.